The West Virginia State Police confirmed an arrest connected to the exploitation of the Whittaker family, and almost immediately one question took over every comment section. Why one arrest, and not the other name everyone keeps talking about? So answer this first, right now, in one word. Evidence or bigger? Which do you think explains it? Because this conversation only makes sense if we slow it down and stop treating arrests like moral verdicts. Arrested is custody. Charged is an accusation. Convicted is what happens after court, evidence, defense, and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Anything before that is a procedural moment, not a conclusion. What people are reacting to emotionally is the gap. One man in handcuffs. Another man publicly connected to the story, still free. To the internet, that looks like favoritism or failure. To the justice system, it can look completely normal. And that's where we start. Reason one is the least dramatic and the most misunderstood. Probable cause is not equal for both people. Arrests don't happen because something feels wrong. They happen when a very specific legal threshold is met. Probable cause means investigators believe, based on concrete facts, that a specific crime occurred and that a specific person committed it. Not maybe, not likely. Enough to justify taking someone into custody and defending that decision in front of a judge. In cases like this, where money, online platforms, vulnerable adults, and multiple people are involved, that threshold is almost never equal across the board. One file can be clean and ready. Another can still be missing a key link. Think about what investigators need that survives court scrutiny. Bank records, account ownership, login authority, payment histories, witness statements that align, digital evidence that shows intent and control. If those elements line up clearly for one person, that's enough to move. If the same elements are still fragmented or indirect for another, investigators don't get to round up people to satisfy public anger. They have to wait. That's why two names in one story does not mean two arrests on the same day. Now here's where people get tripped up. Not arrested does not mean innocent. And arrested does not mean convicted. It means one set of evidence crossed the line first. And that brings us to reason two, which almost no one wants to hear because it complicates the narrative. Different roles create different charge paths. The law doesn't charge vibes, proximity, or association. It charges actions that meet specific elements of a statute. Two people can stand in the same situation and face completely different legal exposure, depending on what they actually did. One person may be accused of directly receiving donations. Another may be accused of controlling accounts or using access devices. Another may be tied to content creation, monetization, or online promotion. Those roles are not interchangeable in court. If someone is alleged to have personally received funds, used payment tools, or controlled where money went, that's a straight line to certain charges. If another person's role was indirect, managing content, posting videos, amplifying fundraising, or even benefiting socially or reputationally, that can still be unethical, harmful, or exploitative, but it's legally harder to charge without proving knowledge and intent. That's the quiet legal truth people hate. Being involved is not the same as being chargeable. Investigators have to show what someone knew, when they knew it, what they controlled, and how they personally benefited. Not just that they were nearby, visible, or influential. So when you ask, why hasn't Eric been arrested yet? One of the first things investigators would look at is this. Who controlled which accounts? Who had login access? Who set up payment methods? Who withdrew funds? Who promised donors what? Who knew where the money was actually going? If those answers are clean for one person and still muddy for another, the split makes sense. And here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes investigators intentionally delay an arrest because the second case isn't weak, it's incomplete. which leads directly into reason 3. They may be building something stronger. An arrest you don't see can be the case that's still being assembled. In investigations involving online fundraising, vulnerable adults, and digital platforms, the slowest part is often the most important. Records don't arrive instantly. Platforms don't hand over data overnight. Banks don't rush subpoenas. And prosecutors don't gamble with high-profile cases unless they're confident the structure will hold. Sometimes the first arrest opens doors. Legal access to devices, preservation of communications, verification of timelines, confirmation of who controlled what and when. That's not speculation. That's procedure. And while the public demands symmetry, if one goes down, they all should, the system is obsessed with survivability. Can this charge survive motions to dismiss? Can it survive cross-examination? Can it survive appeals? If investigators believe another arrest is coming, they will not rush it just to satisfy social media. And here's the part that matters for the Whittakers themselves. A rush case that collapses helps no one. A slower case that holds protects the vulnerable long term. Before we go any further, I want you to pause and answer this honestly in the comments. Which explanation feels most likely so far? Evidence or roles? Because in the next part, we're going to talk about something even more misunderstood. How jurisdiction and cooperation can completely change the timing of custody, even when investigators are already watching closely. Stay with me. Before we go any further, answer this in one word in the comments. Jurisdiction or cooperation? Which one do you think slows cases down the most? Because reason 4 is where a lot of people get angry at the wrong target. Reason 4, jurisdiction and agency coordination change the clock. Cases don't move at the speed of outrage. They move at the speed of paperwork, authority, and location. When alleged conduct crosses state lines, platform boundaries, or agency responsibility, the process stretches whether anyone likes it or not. Here's the part that gets missed in almost every comment section. One arrest can happen quickly because the person is physically present in the state where investigators already have authority. Another person can be connected to the same story but live elsewhere, operate accounts elsewhere, or route money through platforms headquartered elsewhere. That matters. If someone is in West Virginia, local authorities can act immediately once probable cause is met. If another person is in a different state, the process can involve warrants, coordination with out-of-state agencies, and decisions about extradition. None of that is instant, and none of it is optional. Move too early, and the arrest can be challenged. Move incorrectly, and evidence can be suppressed. Move without proper venue, and the case can unravel. So when people say, "Why hasn't he been arrested yet?" it's obvious. What they're really saying is, why isn't the system behaving like social media? Because the system doesn't get to be sloppy. This is especially true in cases involving vulnerable adults. Courts scrutinize these harder, not softer. Any misstep becomes ammunition for defense attorneys later. Which brings us to a reason that makes people deeply uncomfortable, because it feels like favoritism even when it isn't. Reason 5. Interview and cooperation status can delay custody. Let's clear up a massive misconception. Being interviewed, questioned, or even cooperating does not mean someone is immune. It also does not mean there is a deal. It can mean investigators are still testing reliability. Sometimes authorities intentionally keep someone out of custody while they evaluate statements, compare timelines, and verify what aligns with records. If you lock someone up too early, you limit access. If you keep them available, you can test their story against evidence as it comes in. This is not a loophole. It's a strategy. And in emotionally charged cases, especially where the public is demanding blood, restraint is often the smarter move. Investigators don't want confessions that fall apart. They want corroboration. So if one person is arrested and another is not, it may be because one file is already airtight, while the other is still being stress tested. And here's the line people hate but need to hear. Cooperation today does not prevent charges tomorrow. It just means the timeline is different. Which brings us to something most people never think about because it happens quietly, behind doors you don't see. Reason 6, prosecutors, not police, control the charging moment. This is the cleanest explanation you'll ever hear, so read it twice. Police investigate. Police arrest based on probable cause. Prosecutors decide when and how charges are filed. Those are not the same job. An arrest puts someone in custody. A charge is a formal accusation filed in court. Prosecutors time charges strategically, especially in cases involving exploitation, digital money trails, and protected classes. Why? Because once charges are filed, the clock starts. Discovery begins. Defense gets access. Mistakes become permanent. So, sometimes the reason someone hasn't been arrested yet has nothing to do with police not acting and everything to do with prosecutors saying, not yet. We want the strongest version of this case. And if you think prosecutors care about YouTube pressure, I promise you they don't. They care about conviction rates, appellate survival, and not getting embarrassed in front of judge. Which brings us to the reason that explains almost everything and almost no one has the patience to wait for. Reason 7. The case may hinge on the paper trail. This is where internet certainty collapses. In donation-related and exploitation cases, the most decisive evidence is often the slowest to assemble. Bank records, platform payouts, account authority, message archives, device logs, who set up what, who withdrew what, who had access when money moved. Those answers don't come from clips. They don't come from vibes. They don't come from outrage. They come from subpoenas, compliance windows, forensic analysis, and cross-referencing data from multiple sources. And here's the hardest truth of all. The last arrest often waits for the last spreadsheet. Because once that spreadsheet exists, once it shows control, intent, benefit, and knowledge, the case stops being debatable. Until then, the system moves carefully, not loudly. And this is why it can look unfair in real time. One person in custody, another not. Emotions screaming injustice. But what you're actually watching is sequencing. Not arrested does not mean cleared. Not arrested does not mean forgotten. Not arrested means not yet, or not under the specific charge. So here's the comment call, and I want you to answer honestly. Which reason feels most convincing right now? Jurisdiction, cooperation, or paper trail? Drop one word and tell me why. In the next part, we're going to talk about the signals that actually matter. The public legal indicators that tell you whether a case is expanding, narrowing, or about to move, without spreading rumors or turning real people into speculation fuel. Stay with me. Before we go deeper, answer this honestly in the comments. Do you trust silence more than noise when it comes to investigations? Yes or no, and explain why. Because this part is where people usually flip the meaning of silence completely backward. Silence does not always mean protection. Silence does not always mean guilt. Silence often means containment. And containment is one of the most misunderstood phases in any investigation tied to vulnerable people. Let's talk about what investigators actually prioritize once an arrest is made. When one person is detained, the case doesn't slow down. It narrows. The chaos collapses into lanes. Investigators stop chasing everything and start validating what matters most. That's when timelines get sharper, not louder. Here's the key reality people miss. Once an arrest happens, every remaining move is judged against one question. Will this survive court scrutiny later? And that changes behavior immediately. This is where the system becomes conservative on purpose. Because now defense attorneys are watching. Now evidence handling matters more than speed. Now every interview has consequences. So if another person connected to the same story isn't arrested yet, it doesn't mean the focus moved away from them. It often means the focus moved on to them, quietly. Now let's break down the 3 signals that usually show up before a second arrest. Signals most people don't recognize. Signal 1. Narrowing language from authorities. When investigators stop using broad phrases like ongoing situation and start using precise language like specific transactions, defined time frames, or documented accounts, that's not a slowdown. That's a lock-in phase. You'll notice fewer public statements, fewer leaks, less commentary. That's intentional, because vague cases talk loudly. Strong cases talk carefully. If authorities believe there's more to charge, they stop feeding the public entirely. And that silence makes people panic. But panic isn't a legal signal. Precision is. Signal 2, donor outreach and platform requests. One of the quietest but most important indicators of case expansion is when investigators start reaching out to donors, platforms, or third parties. This doesn't always make headlines. But when law enforcement asks for transaction histories, payout reports, login authorities, and content monetization records, they're no longer asking if money moved. They're asking who controlled it. And control is everything. Because exploitation cases don't hinge on who appeared on camera. They hinge on who decided where money went. That's why a person who filmed may not be arrested yet, while a person who controlled accounts is. Or vice versa. And if investigators believe control was shared or transferred, they have to prove knowledge, not just access. Which brings us to the part the internet hates the most. Signal 3. Investigators testing consistency, not confessions. People expect dramatic moments. A knock at the door, a confrontation, a reveal. That's not how modern financial exploitation cases work. Instead, investigators often let people talk. They compare statements over time. They compare explanations to records. They test memory against data. And inconsistencies don't trigger arrests immediately. They get documented. Because inconsistent statements are more valuable later than early custody, especially when intent is disputed. Now pause here and understand why this matters in the Whittaker context. This case involves vulnerable adults, online monetization, multiple intermediaries, public attention, alleged financial benefit, and a family that cannot advocate for themselves clearly. That combination makes prosecutors cautious by necessity, not because they're weak, because they're aware this case will be attacked hard. Which brings us to the question everyone asks but rarely frames correctly. Why arrest one person first? Because one person may meet the elements of a charge cleanly. Another person may require proving awareness, intent, authority, benefit, and exploitation beyond association. That's not favoritism. That's legal structure. And now, let's address something uncomfortable. Public pressure can delay arrests, not accelerate them. When a case becomes viral, prosecutors become defensive, not passive. They anticipate defense arguments about bias, mob influence, and prejudgment. They slow down. They double-check. They build walls around evidence, which is why yelling "arrest him now" online often backfires. Because no prosecutor wants to hand the defense a mistrial narrative. Now here's where we draw a critical boundary. Explaining why someone hasn't been arrested is not the same as defending them. Understanding process is not endorsement. And refusing to declare guilt early is not denial of harm. It's respect for the people at the center, especially the vulnerable ones. Because the worst outcome is not delayed justice. The worst outcome is failed justice. And failed justice leaves families exposed twice. Once to exploitation, once to a system that rushed and lost. So here's the question I want you to sit with and answer honestly. Would you rather see one fast arrest that collapses later, or two slower arrests that hold up forever? In the next part, we're going to talk about the myths that derail cases like this, especially the idea that no arrest equals innocence or that silence equals protection. Because those myths don't just confuse viewers. They create openings for the next exploitation cycle. And we're not letting that happen again. Before you read another line, pause and answer this in the comments. When a system moves slowly, do you think it's because it's broken or because it's trying not to break the case? Because part 4 is where we dismantle the most dangerous myths surrounding this situation. Myths that don't just confuse people, but actively put vulnerable families at risk. This is the part nobody likes, because it doesn't give you villains on demand. It gives you structure, and structure is boring until you realize it's the only thing standing between justice and collapse. Let's start with the most common myth. Myth number 1. If Eric hasn't been arrested yet, he must be innocent. This is one of the most persistent misunderstandings in true crime and internet-driven cases. Not arrested does not equal cleared. Not arrested does not equal innocent. Not arrested means no arrest has occurred yet. That's it. There is no moral declaration embedded in timing. Investigations don't run on fairness optics. They run on burdens of proof. In fact, some of the most serious cases in U.S. history involved long delays between the first arrest and subsequent ones. Sometimes months, sometimes years, because the second arrest required proving intent, not just action. And intent is the hardest thing to prove, especially when money, platforms, and intermediaries are involved. Which leads us to the next myth. Myth number 2. If investigators had enough, they'd arrest everyone at once. That sounds logical, and it's wrong. Simultaneous arrests happen when evidence is equal, roles are symmetrical, risks of flight are similar, and the legal elements line up cleanly. That is rare in financial exploitation cases. Here's why. In these cases, investigators often separate defendants to prevent coordinated stories, observe behavioral responses, protect evidence integrity, and identify pressure points. Arresting one person can unlock information you don't get by arresting both, especially if one person controlled accounts and the other controlled narrative. That's not manipulation. That's investigation. Now let's talk about the myth that causes the most harm. Myth number 3. Silence means someone is being protected. This one fuels outrage, and opportunists love it. Silence does not automatically mean protection. Silence often means containment. When a case involves alleged exploitation, incapacitated victims, online monetization, and potential civil consequences, authorities become extremely careful about what they say publicly. Why? Because anything said can tip off suspects, contaminate witnesses, create defense arguments, or expose the victims to further harm. In cases involving vulnerable adults, confidentiality isn't a courtesy. It's a shield. And sometimes that shield looks like stonewalling, especially to an audience used to instant updates. But here's the truth that matters. The system is far more willing to let the public be angry than to let a case fall apart. Now, let's address something people whisper but rarely say clearly. Public opinion does not drive arrests. Evidence does. You could trend a hashtag. You can flood comment sections. You can pressure creators. None of that creates probable cause. And when pressure spikes, prosecutors don't speed up, they slow down. Because rush cases get dismissed, and dismissed cases don't protect anyone. Which brings us to a very real risk in the Whittaker situation. The risk of misdirected outrage. When attention locks onto one person prematurely, it creates two dangerous outcomes. It distracts from broader accountability, It gives future exploiters a blueprint, because exploitation doesn't require one villain. It requires access, confusion, authority gaps, and emotional manipulation. If everyone believes the bad actor has already been identified, vigilance drops. And that's when the next person steps in. That's why Part 4 matters. Because this case is not just about who gets arrested. It's about how exploitation survives visibility. Let's talk about the structure that allowed this to happen in the first place. The Whittaker story did not become dangerous because it went viral. It became dangerous because virality outpaced safeguards. No unified trust. No independent fiduciary. No court-appointed oversight. No financial firewall. Just attention, money, and informal authority. And informal authority is the most dangerous kind, because it looks like help until it isn't. Now here's the part people don't want to hear. The law is not built to respond quickly to new forms of exploitation. Platforms evolve faster than statutes. Monetization models change faster than enforcement frameworks. And when a case sits at the intersection of social media, vulnerable adults, donations, content creation, the law has to adapt in real time, which means investigators don't just build a case. They build precedent. They decide how future cases will be charged. That's why restraint matters. Because if this case is rushed and fails, the message sent isn't justice. It's permission. Now let's talk about the emotional weight people carry when watching this unfold. People want closure. They want certainty. They want to believe someone is either fully guilty or fully innocent. But reality doesn't work that way, especially not in cases where harm occurred without clear criminal intent at the beginning. And yes, that distinction matters legally. Exploitation cases often hinge on when intent formed, not just whether harm occurred, which is why evidence sequencing matters, and why arrests don't always align with outrage cycles. Now ask yourself this, and answer honestly. Would you want a case built on speculation and pressure, or documents, timelines, and authority control? Because one gets applause, the other gets convictions, and only one protects the Whittakers long term. Here's the final myth we need to dismantle in this part. Myth number 4. Talking about process means you don't care about the victims. This is emotionally powerful and deeply unfair. Understanding process is how you prevent re-victimization. Because if you don't understand how exploitation works, you're vulnerable to it happening again, to this family or another. Care without comprehension is how cycles repeat. And the Whittakers have already paid enough. So let's bring this back to the core question. Why hasn't Eric been arrested yet? Because arrest requires specific elements. Evidence must meet a threshold. Intent must be provable. Authority must be clear. And the case must survive court. Not because someone is untouchable. Not because investigators are blind. Not because silence means approval. But because justice is fragile. And fragile things break when rushed. In Part 5, we're going to do something practical. We're going to lay out what would signal an impending arrest, what changes legally when prosecutors file, what viewers should watch for, and how to protect the Whittakers without feeding rumors. Because clarity is the only antidote to exploitation. And this time, we're not letting confusion win. Stay with me. Before we close this out, I want you to answer one last question in the comments. Not emotionally, not angrily, but honestly. Do you want justice that feels fast or justice that actually holds? Because Part 5 isn't about defending anyone. It's about what real movement looks like when a case is alive, active, and unfinished. This is where we stop guessing and start watching the right signals. Let's talk about what actually changes when an investigation turns into charges. What an arrest would look like before it happens. Most people imagine arrests as sudden. In reality, they're often telegraphed quietly. Here are the signals that matter. not rumors, not Facebook posts, not deleted photos. Signal 1. Charging documents. When prosecutors are ready, paperwork moves first. Court dockets update. Case numbers appear. Counts are listed. This happens before handcuffs in many cases. If you don't see docket activity, there is no charge yet, no matter what someone heard. Signal 2. Subpoenas and record freezes. In financial exploitation cases, the loudest movement is invisible. Banking subpoenas, platform compliance requests, account freezes, metadata preservation. These steps take time, and they don't get announced. But when they happen, everything else pauses, including arrests. Signal 3. Language shifts. Watch how authorities speak. There's a big difference between investigating, under review, still active, no further comment at this time. Those phrases aren't filler. They're legal posture. When language tightens, action is usually close. One out of trust right now. Let's be very clear, because confusion is how exploitation grows. Do not trust. Anonymous inside sources. Screenshots without timestamps. Creators claiming certainty. People promising big reveals tomorrow. Emotional certainty without documents. If someone tells you they know what's coming, ask how. If the answer isn't, court records, verified filings, named authorities, then it's noise. And noise hurts the people at the center of this story. Why timing feels unfair, but isn't random. Here's the hard truth most people don't want to hear. The system doesn't move to satisfy fairness optics. It moves to survive defense scrutiny. A rushed arrest that collapses later doesn't protect the Whittakers. It re-traumatizes them. It gives defense attorneys leverage. It gives exploiters room to rebrand. It teaches the next bad actor how to dodge consequences. Slow cases feel cruel. Failed cases are worse. What viewers can do that actually helps. This is the part that matters most. If you care about the Whittakers, here's how you protect them right now. 1. Stop amplifying unverified claims. Even well-meaning speculation becomes ammunition for defense teams. 2. Don't fund urgency. Anyone asking for money tied to this family without court oversight is a red flag. Full stop. 3. Demand structure, not saviors. Real help looks like fiduciaries, guardianship oversight, legal representation, transparent accounting, not personalities. 4. Protect their privacy. Every rumor about locations, care facilities, or conditions increases risk. Silence can be protection. The most important truth of all. Here it is, stripped of emotion, stripped of sides. Not arrested does not mean not accountable. Arrested does not mean convicted. Convicted is the only outcome that actually closes harm. Everything before that is process. And process is slow because it has to be. Why this case matters beyond one family. Because this isn't just about the Whittakers. It's about a new kind of exploitation. Visibility without safeguards. Compassion without structure. Monetization without oversight. And until the system catches up, clarity is our responsibility. That means no rumor economies, no hero narratives, no trial by comment section, just facts, just records, just patience. One word, be honest. Process or pressure? Which do you think actually protects vulnerable families in the long run, and why? This story isn't over. But if we handle it right, it doesn't have to repeat. Stay grounded, stay careful, and stay focused on what actually keeps people safe. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.